I have great news for you. Islam is dying. There is a report in the Turkish media from several days ago that a scholar and member of the Turkish Directorate of Religious Affairs made a shocking declaration that the Quran turns people away from Islam and turns them toward atheism and deism. Faruk Beşer, who writes for the newspaper known as Yeni Şafak, which translates to New Dawn, wrote an article that is titled, "Does Reading Quran Translations Distance the Youth from Religion?" In his article, he reports that he had a brief correspondence with someone from Turkey's High Council of Religious Affairs. That is actually a thing that exists in Turkey, which is a secular country. This member of the High Council of Religious Affairs is Professor Dr. Cafer Karadaş. According to the article, he said something that roughly translates as, "Sir, the major arguments of atheists and deists are rather based on Quran translations than on philosophy. Quran translations can't deliver the whole meaning. In this regard, a cooperation by Diyanet, the Directorate of Religious Affairs, and theologians would be very appropriate and would reverse the wind." Religion teachers request free Quran translations and distribute them to students. When students read and experience problems interpreting the translation, they get confused and can turn toward these currents, atheism and deism. I believe that this, in my humble opinion, is our main problem. So, okay, there is a small correction here that needs to be made to all these reports in the Turkish media. What this guy is actually saying is not that the Quran itself turns people away from Islam, but rather that Quran translations turn students or young people away from Islam. But that is also, on its own, very problematic for Islam. This goes back to something that I say so often, that most Muslims have no idea about the contents of the Quran. And the average Muslim knows this. The average Muslim doesn't read the Quran and knows that other Muslims don't read the Quran either. And even if they read the Quran, they don't read it in a language that they understand. In fact, Muslims discourage each other from reading the Quran in a language other than Arabic. And even if you read it in Arabic and you understand Arabic, you are supposed to go to a scholar or read exegesis to further understand what the Quran is actually trying to tell you. The number of people who have read the Quran in their own language is extremely low. I'm proud to declare that I have read it numerous times in my own language, and it is awful. In fact, it was the Quran itself that started to turn me away from Islam, although it wasn't eventually just the Quran, it was much more than that. He says that young people turn toward atheism and deism because they read the Quran, they get confused by the things that the Quran translations say, and then they think, well, this is problematic, that is problematic, I will turn toward atheism and deism. Of course, this is a huge oversimplification of the issue. People don't just read the Quran and think, oh, this is problematic, I don't believe anymore. No, they read, then they start to question, then they look for answers, and then they don't find satisfying answers, and then they leave. Reading the Quran is only the beginning of all this. But let's assume he is right. Let's assume young people just read the Quran in their own language, in Turkish. They are dissatisfied with it, and then they turn away. I did come across Quran translations from the Directorate of Religious Affairs, which is what this guy is referencing. Those translations are in many ways quite accurate translations of the Quran, except those translations actually add interpretations to the Quran which cannot be found in the original text. For example, one of the most popular examples is chapter 4, verse 34. The Quran literally says, "Men are in charge of women by what Allah has given one over the other and what they spend from their wealth. So righteous women are devoutly obedient, guarding in absence what Allah would have them guard. But those from whom you fear arrogance, advise them, forsake them in bed, and finally strike them. But if they obey you, seek no means against them. Indeed, Allah is ever exalted and grand." What the modern translation of the Turkish Directorate says is this: men are the protectors of women, because Allah made some people superior to others, and because men spend from their own wealth. Good women are obedient. They protect what is secret because Allah protects them. Those women whom you see oppose by rejecting the obligations of their marriage, advise them, then leave them in their beds alone. If these don't help and you are forced to, then hit them lightly. If they obey, then don't seek any means against them. Indeed, Allah is very great, very big. In this example, the translation quite accurately represents what the Quran says, except that it adds several things in brackets that are not there in the Quran at all. Interpretations to the Quranic text in order to make it sound better than it actually is. So the translations of the Directorate of Religious Affairs already does add reinterpretations to the Quran to make it look nice. But other than that, people can easily understand what the Quran says. Looking at other examples, I see that everyone who reads the translation can read that slavery is okay within the context of the Quran, that you can have sex with slave girls, that you should fight the infidel. Some protective measures that the Quran translators in Turkish employ are to change several Quran verses that are obviously scientifically wrong, embarrassingly wrong. So these people actually do tweak the Quran already and make it sound different, make it sound more modern, more reasonable in a way in Turkish. If we trust this scholar, we are to think that the Quran on its own, translated in this way and improved by the Turkish authorities, is insufficient to keep the Muslim community together. Young people will read the Quran and will not like it, and they will turn away toward atheism and deism, which is becoming a huge problem in Turkey and in other Muslim cultures, which is why these people are increasingly talking about these issues. What these people are saying is that the Quran cannot keep up with the times, which is why they must work together to save the Quran, to help the Quran make sense to the average young person today, which means Allah is a terrible communicator. It seems like the perfect Allah didn't really think this through. What a shame. Well, I feel glad to see that so many more Islamic scholars and educators point out that reading the Quran in your own language is detrimental to Islam, to your Islamic faith. Therefore, I would, as always, encourage you and everybody not to take my word at all, but to go and get yourself a Quran translation in your own language and just read it and see what happens. See what you think about the Quran. Education is key, and education is destroying Islam, which is fantastic. And it's not the translations, it is the Quran itself, the religion itself. You can do nothing against that. That's all for today. I'll be back with much more this week. For now, thanks for watching. If you like this video, it's very important for me that you like and subscribe. Most of my videos are not monetized. If you want to support what I am doing, you can support me on Patreon or on apostateprophet.com. I appreciate your support very much. Have a fantastic day and stay away from Islam.